Alright, students, welcome to our first lesson on early Cold War and post-war America. So after World War II, we're going to see returning veterans are going to face a severe housing shortage. And so in response to this crisis, developers will use an assembly line method to mass produce houses. Developer William Levitt bragged that his company could build a home in 16 minutes for $7,000. And this led to the creation of the suburbs. And with the help of low-interest loans from the GI Bill, many veterans will move into suburbs. We'll see a return to traditional roles after the war will be the norm. Men will be expected to work, while women are expected to stay home and care for the children. But conflict will emerge as many women wanted to stay in the workforce. Divorce rates will surge, but were highly frowned upon. We're going to see remarkable economic recovery. Experts who predicted a post-war depression were proved wrong as they failed to consider the $135 billion in savings Americans had accumulated from defense work, service pay, and investments in war bonds. Americans are now ready to buy consumer goods. Despite growth, though, issues persist. One persistent post-war issue involved labor strikes. In 1946 alone, 4.5 million discontented workers, including steel workers, coal miners, and railroad workers, went on strike. And Truman was tough on these strikers. Truman refused to let the strikes cripple the nation, and he threatened to draft the striking workers and then order them as soldiers to return to work. The strategy worked because strikers would end up returning to their jobs. We still have social unrest. African Americans feel they deserve equal rights, especially after hundreds of thousands served in World War II. Truman took action in 1948 by desegregating the armed forces. And additionally, Truman ordered an end to discrimination in the hiring of governmental employees. The Democrats will nominate President Truman in 1948 for the 1948 election. The Republicans will nominate New York Governor Thomas Dewey. And the polls showed Dewey held a comfortable lead going into the election day. Truman is going to win in a stunning upset. Truman's Give 'em Hell Harry campaign worked, and he won a very close race against Dewey. And here is a picture of Truman holding a now infamous Chicago Tribune, announcing incorrectly Dewey's victory. Here you can see the Electoral College, where Truman won the 1948 election. And as they were trying to protest Truman's emphasis on civil rights, Southern Democrats known as Dixiecrats opted to run a third candidate, South Carolina Governor Strom Thurmond, and they called him the state's Rights Party. Alright, Truman proposed an ambitious economic program. It was supposed to be an extension of FDR's New Deal. He proposed, and it was called the Fair Deal. It proposed a nationwide system of compulsory health insurance. This was defeated. First president to propose a nationwide system of insurance. He wanted a crop subsidy system for farmers. This was defeated. He wanted to raise the minimum wage. That was passed. He extended Social Security to more people. That was passed. And he initiated flood control and irrigation projects. That was also passed. Okay. He secured federal funding for low-income housing. And that is Truman's economic plan. Alright, let's talk about the origins of the Cold War. So after being allies during World War II, the US and the USSR soon viewed each other with increasing suspicion. The political differences created a climate of icy tension that plunged the two countries into an era of bitter rivalry known as the Cold War. Economic and political differences. At the heart of the tension was a fundamental difference in political systems. The economic was, for the Soviet Union, was communism, where government activity controlled all property and economics. The U.S. had a capitalist or a mixed economy where the system had private citizens controlling most economic activity. Politically, the Soviet Union was controlled by a communist party, that established totalitarian government with no opposing parties. The U.S. is a democratic republic. Politics controlled by the people using the vote and selecting from politicians from different political parties. And here we have a picture on the right where the Soviets viewed Marx, Engels, and Lenin as the founders of communism. Animosity exists prior to the war and grew during the war. Stalin resented the Western Allies meeting without him, such as with the Atlantic Charter in 1941, or 42, I mean. The Western Allies delaying and attacking the Germans in Europe and drawing heat away from the Russian front, like at Stalingrad. That they had sacrificed the most, thus had won the war for the Allies. The U.S. keeping its atomic bomb a secret. The United States resented that the Soviets were once allied with Hitler, and that they stood for a political system that looked to overthrow all capitalist democratic countries. So here are the U.S. aims versus the Soviet aims in Europe. The United States wanted to create a new world order in which all nations had the right of self-determination, gain access to raw materials and markets for its industries, rebuild European governments to ensure stability and to create new markets for American goods, reunite Germany believing that Europe would be more secure if Germany were productive. The Soviets wanted to encourage communism in other countries as part of the worldwide struggle between workers and the wealthy. Rebuild its war-ravaged economy using Eastern Europe's industrial equipment and raw materials, and the Soviets wanted to control Eastern Europe to balance U.S. influence in Western Europe, and they wanted to keep Germany divided and weak so that it would never again threaten the Soviet Union. This here is a list of the World War II deaths, where you can see how many people died. Compared to some countries, the U.S. is a much smaller number than others, especially China, the Soviet Union, Germany, and Japan. Those four countries were hit bad. The Soviet Union losing 11 million, almost 11 million deaths. Not to mention almost over 23 million deaths when you count in civilians as well. And the United Nations is going to help provide hope for this time. Hopes for world peace were high at the end of the war. The most visible symbol of these hopes was the United Nations, also referred to as the UN. On April 25, 1945, the representatives of 50 nations will meet in San Francisco to establish the United Nations. On July 1945, the Senate ratified the charter by a vote of 89 to 2. The United States became the first nation to join the United Nations. On October 24, 1945, the UN officially came into existence and established its headquarters in New York City. This here is the United Nations headquarters in New York City. The Secretariat Tower is on the left, with the conference building in front of it, and the General Assembly building, which has a sloping roof on the right. The General Assembly included all member nations, and in that there was also a Security Council, which addresses military and political problems and has the power to veto any action proposed by the General Assembly. This 15-member Security Council includes 5 permanent members, such as the United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, France, and China, and 10 rotating elected members, 3 African countries, 2 Asian countries, 2 Latin American and Caribbean countries, 2 Western European, and 1 from Eastern Europe. Here's another view of the UN building. Here's the inside where the General Assembly meets. And the Soviets want to dominate Eastern Europe. The Soviet Union suffered an estimated 20 million World War II deaths. Half of these were civilian, and as a result, they felt justified in their claim to Eastern Europe. Furthermore, they felt they needed Eastern Europe as a buffer, which is an area of land between you and your enemy against future German aggression. Europe and the world was now dividing into 2 political philosophies. Eastern Europe was communism, Western Europe was capitalism, or democracy. In a 1946 speech, Churchill said, "An iron curtain has descended across the continent," and the phrase Iron Curtain came to stand for the division of Europe. In a 1946 speech, Stalin said communism and capitalism were incompatible, and another war was inevitable. Stalin installed satellite nations, which are communist governments in the Eastern European countries: Albania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Yugoslavia, and East Germany. He did this after promising 3 elections for Eastern Europe at the Yalta Conference. Stalin is going to purge satellite nations, and purge means the forced removal of people thought to be disloyal. The Soviets will interfere with elections to ensure a communist winner. Soviets also removed factories, transportation equipment, and machinery to restore their own economy. So here is where it's divided. You'll notice even Berlin is divided into 4 zones: an American zone, a French zone, a British zone, and a Soviet zone, as well as the city of Berlin itself was divided into 4 zones. And then here are the post-Soviet states in alphabetical order that can be found.